Let's expand our mathematical functions by looking at the SumIF function. We have in our fruit data file a SumIF sheet that has a list of fruit, month sales, and salesman that refers to the sales of fruit for different months by different people. And what we'd like to achieve over on the right in our little tables is some summaries of that information. So if I wanted to add up the total sales that were individually more than $25, then I would need to use a SumIF function so that I can look down the sales column, but not add them all up because that would just be sum, just add up the ones that meet my criteria. So I start here where I would like the answer with our normal equals, then the name of the function, SumIF, open brackets. Now what is the range that I'm wanting to work on? Well, it's actually the sales. Now I have these set up as named ranges, so I can just put the word sales in there, and you can see it highlights in blue the sales information. Now the criteria that I'm wishing to check against must be put into speech marks. So I open speech marks, more than 25, close speech mark, and then close my round brackets. There is another section to the SumIF, which is the sum range, but it's optional, and we'll look at that shortly. At the moment, we want to look down the sales column, add up all of those sales that meet our criteria of more than 25. Now logically, using the speech marks doesn't make any sense when dealing with numbers, but for this particular function, those speech marks are compulsory. When we press return, we see that they add up to $10,506. Doing the same to check those values that are greater than 50, we can do equals SumIF, open brackets, the same range, that's sales, but a different criteria, greater than 50, close speech marks, close round brackets. Now within the criteria, you can use all the normal comparison operators, less than, more than, not equal to, more than or equal to, less than or equal to, that are pretty common on any comparison data. Return, and they add up to 8,628. Now that's using the SumIF, where the criteria effectively is in the same column that you're wishing to add up. With the salesman over here, where we have Bob, Dot, and Sue, what I would like to add up are all of Bob's sales. So effectively looking down this column for the criteria, which in this case is Bob, and looking down this column for the column to sum. So in Bob, I can put equals SumIF, open brackets. Now this time the two ranges are important. The first range is for the criteria, the second range is for the summing. So the first range is our salesman range, and again they're set up as named ranges, so I can just put salesman. The criteria is Bob, so let me choose Bob, so that's H2, comma, and then the sum range, which is the sales. Again, it's a named range, I only need to type the range in, and that's highlighted in red. So I want to sum where H2, which is the cell with Bob in, occurs in the salesman column, but then sum the sales column. Now when you do these, compare one column and add another column, the two columns must be in relatively the same position. So they must start in the same place and finish in the same place. Otherwise they will be slightly offset and you could get a skewed result because of that. So my sales column starts at C2, my salesman column starts at D2. So the two columns will sit side by side quite happily. So return, and I get 646. So Bob's total sales add up to $646. Now because in the formula I referenced Bob by linking to H2, that will now allow me to copy this function down. You can see that dot adds up to 3784, and it's checking H3, so it's looking for Dot in the salesman column, and the same for Sue, is looking for Sue in the salesman column. I can check that that's worked by simply changing one of the values here for Sue. Let's say she sold 2,000. That then increments her value by 2,000. Now the scenario is pretty much the same for doing this for the month. So it's equals SumIF, open brackets. Now the range with my months in, which is where the criteria is called month. We can see it in the list there, month, comma. Criteria is H6, which is January, comma. And the sum range is my sales again. Close brackets. And we can see the formulas highlighted the two ranges, the month range for the criteria and the sales range for adding up. Return, and January is 602. Just like the Bob, Dot and Sue scenario, because I've linked to that cell there, I can copy this formula down to December, and it quite happily then goes and selects and adds up the correct data for each month. So as long as you get the first one right, the drag down there is perfect. And now last little table here, pretty much the same idea, equals SumIF, open brackets. My range this time is in the fruit named range, so that's fruit, comma, criteria is in this cell here, comma, and the adding up is in the sales column. And again, we see the fruit is highlighted, the sales are highlighted, and the two named ranges are relatively at the same start point. So as it goes down the fruit and finds strawberry, it can go across and select the right value. And we can then replicate, because I've used the cell to the left as the lookup for the fruit name. So that's the SumIF function. Used here without the optional SumRange, compare the same column that you're adding up, used in all the other locations to check the criterion one range, but then add up an adjoining range.